Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hey, everybody. It's Lynda Lippin here. Thank you once again for coming back to the Pilates Goddess podcast. I am so thrilled today. Many of you who've been following me for a while know that I have been on Steve Washuta's TrulyFit podcast 3 times now. 3 times. And this is the first time, now that I have my own podcast, that I have been able to invite Steve over into your world, into my world, so that we could have a conversation. And really what we're going to be talking about today is how to incorporate kind of all of the modalities of training that we all do, whether it's cardio or HIIT or strength training or Pilates or yoga, and realistically how we can do the best work for ourselves and for our own bodies by finding kind of the best combinations of what we like and what works for us and what works for our bodies moving forward. Now, Steve is a personal trainer, and he has been a personal trainer for over 13 years. He runs the TrulyFit app and the TrulyFit podcast. So he has online ways of working with people. Steve, you've been training folks online for a very long time, since pre-COVID, as have I. I think we are both fans of being able to be home with our families and get things done and still serve our clients to the best of our abilities. So welcome.
Lynda, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on the podcast. It's great to always chat with you. And then it's also great to be on the other side and not being asking all the questions and being asked some questions and not having to do the intros. But it's great to be here. I appreciate it.
So, Steve, I know that in your background, you have a whole lot of tools in your toolbox. So talk to me for a second about the different kinds of trainings that you've done for yourself, and what you're bringing to the table for your clients.
So I first started off in what you would consider a traditional lifting background, playing high school sports, learning how to lift for strength, for hypertrophy, for power, for endurance, those sorts of things. Then I became a National Academy of Sports Medicine certified personal trainer. So learned a little bit more of the nuances of the body and sort of kinesiology. Then into Pilates, level 3 peak Pilates, then into corrective exercise training, then into TRX. I have about 6 different TRX certifications, everything from sports medicine to group fitness. So I've done it all really in the industry. That's just some of my certifications. But I found out throughout the time, and I know a lot of people in the nutrition realm also find this out, it's not really one particular modality or way to go about something. Really, it's not just I need to only do Pilates or I need to only do weightlifting or I need to only do cardio. Just like in nutrition, it's not I need to only eat keto or only eat vegetables or only eat this. It's about consistency. It's about adherence to the program. And it's about having a few general principles when you're looking at health and fitness. And that's sort of what I shape my career around.
Okay. So, and I agree with you on that. I I have watched, seriously, in the last decade, I have watched clients end up in the hospital with rhabdo from going crazy in CrossFit. I have watched clients tear ligaments in their yoga classes. I have watched, people just getting hyper focused on one thing. They all only soul cycle, only spinning, only this, only that. And I've had friends of mine end up with gout from keto.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, because that's kind of what happens. That's how your body deals with these things. And I agree that there just need to be some kind of just general principles of just kind of health and balance. So what would you say are the primary principles that you like people to kind of walk away with?
Well, first, I think this is a major caveat, Lynda, that, sort of in my industry, in the personal training industry, there are some people who have very particular goals, and these principles might not work for that. So if let's go ahead, I had a client who was a 41-year-old female who wanted to get up on stage, and we needed to get her to about 15% body fat, and she needed to look a particular way.
Oh, for
So
doing competitive bodybuilding? Yeah.
for competitive bodybuilding, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about very specific goals like that, then what I'm going to talk about now doesn't really come into play. So what I want to talk about is just with most of our clients are, Lynda, is people coming in for general health and wellness. They want to lose some weight around the midsection. They want to, they want to tone up, look a little bit better, feel better, sleep better, interact with their lifestyles better, right? The general population. So I know we agree on a lot of this. There's movement patterns that we want to hit: push, pull, hinge, lunge, squat, rotate, plank. Those are things we want to get our clients moving in those directions. It doesn't have to be every session, but if we're working with a client, let's say over the course, let's say 2 or 3 sessions over the course of a week, hopefully I get them to move in all those movement patterns throughout the week at least.
Right.
And then for me, at least, it's to use different modalities and objects while I'm doing that. So I like to change up the duration, which is how long I'm doing the exercise for time under tension. Sometimes it's 10 seconds, sometimes it's a minute, sometimes it's 3 reps, sometimes it's 100 reps. It just depends on the exercise. I like to change up the object. Could use a Pilates reformer, could use a TheraBand, could use a dumbbell, could use a TRX suspension strap. It depends on what I'm trying to do, but it's also good to challenge my client and use different tools. I like to change, so that's the D and the O, and then I like to change the tempo up. So the tempo is slow, fast, some isometric holds. You have to mess with the concentric, eccentric. And then the stability portion, which you and I have had long conversations about, is that, not just throwing your client on a BOSU, but making sure that they're stable in certain ways, whether that's split stance as opposed to a regular wide stance, maybe working on one foot sometimes, different ways to challenge their stability. And I think if you look at that, all the movement patterns, avoid injury, challenge them with different tools and different times under tension, you're pretty much going to get to your goal of getting your client healthier and more balanced and just overall general health and wellness.
Yeah, I agree also that, sometimes we do get clients who have a specific goal that they really do need to meet. Like, for example, you're doing competitive bodybuilding, or you're trying out for the ballet company, or, whatever these things are. But I find, for most of my clients, when they do have like a special functional goal, it's more in the context of, I'm finally taking the trip to Nepal and I want to be able to get up and down off a donkey. Yeah, I mean, seriously, I want to be able to hike. I want to be able to get up and down off of the animal that's going to carry me for part of the hike. And this is something that I'm not used to doing. I don't know if I can come up and throw my leg over a saddle. Like, I don't, how do we work on that? And then, we can kind of work the sessions around that. Now, in terms of, say, a client who's looking for personal training, do you see a big difference between online and in person?
Great question. So my biggest struggle, Lynda, right away was that I wasn't 100% of who I normally am in person as opposed to online. Meaning, if Lynda were to decide to work with me as a personal trainer and we were in a gym together, you were in my gym, my facility, I feel like I can give you 100% of who I am. If we are virtual, I might only be 80% of who I am, meaning I just, I can't walk around you in a 360 manner. We don't have that like same personable thing where I can read all the cues as good as I could in person. But I had to drop my ego, because if the client still wanted to work with me virtually and I was still helping them get to their goals and they preferred to use me over someone else, whether that was in person or virtually, then I had to find a way. So I think that was a struggle too, because yes, are you going to be 100% of yourself virtually? Probably not. But you're still might be better suited to work with that client, especially if you've worked with them in the past. You know their body, you know what they like, you know what they don't like, those sorts of things, which is so important, as you know, for injury prevention, to really know what your client's comfortable with and not comfortable with. So I think as far as that was concerned, that was the hardest part for me personally. But otherwise, no, I think virtual training is actually an advantage to so many clients. Not having to be so structured in the schedule. If you have to leave work, travel to a gym, get dressed, go to the gym, get home, you really have to block off maybe 2 hours of your time. Whereas if you work from home or you're already home and you could plan to just, literally roll upstairs to your bedroom, change your clothes, turn on the computer and start virtual training, it saves you a lot of time. And there's also a host of people, I'm sure you could speak to this, Lynda, that don't feel comfortable in gyms. They feel like people are staring at them. They're doing the movements wrong. And it's a big thing, especially if you're new to working out, that they're body conscious about things. And I get it. And that fades. You don't have to worry about that. So I think that's been a benefit for the general population.
Yeah, I feel like realistically for the general training that most of our clients are doing virtually, it's perfectly fine. Like if somebody wants to be lifting super heavy weights, I would prefer them to be in a facility where there are people to watch them. Now, I have some friends who are also, online trainers, and they will actually do the powerlifting training virtually, but their client is in a facility with folks to spot them.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And where they've got a Smith cage and where they've got, different places that they can play where everything's still pretty structured, because otherwise I think that can get a little scary and get
Totally. Yeah.
and get a
Yeah.
little
And
fishy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I only work with general population typically, just to give people an idea. So the people that I work with online, I would give them a list of things to buy off of, let's say, Amazon or anywhere else. These are the dumbbells I want you to get. This is the Pilates ring I want you to get. These are the TheraBands I want you to get. This is whatever the mat I want you to get, so on and so forth. It's at a set price. They order that stuff. So I know what equipment they have, which is also important because there's only so much time. You don't want a lot of curveballs, and you want to make sure that you know what they have so that you can kind of pre-plan out in your head a little bit what they have and what you can do on a day-to-day basis. Because unlike a gym, where if you work at that gym every day, you kind of know all the equipment. You want to make sure that your client, you're not just walking into a virtual training session. You're like, oh, what equipment do you have? And your client goes, oh, nothing. I have a mat. It's like, okay, well, now I'm extremely limited. So I think you being the one who controls your client's equipment is important in that virtual training process.
Right. Now, what was very interesting, something that I really watched at the beginning of the pandemic, right, was that, let's face it, gym owners and Pilates studio owners have all dropped a lot of money on equipment. Equipment is not cheap. It's not cheap in the fitness world. It is, buying any kind of like electronic equipment, and then you have to do maintenance and air filters and all of that. As we know, Pilates apparatus is, you're not getting a reformer for less than $3,000 or $4,000 at this point, and everyone's got like a 1-year waiting list due to supply chain issues. And I remember that there were so many teachers and so many studios and so many gyms who were like, you have to be on the equipment. The equipment is so much better than what you can do with free weights or the mat. And we've been through this in the fitness world too. Remember when Nautilus came out and everyone was like, oh, it's the best thing ever. And then, something else came out and that was the best thing ever. And, consistently we get the best thing ever. And then there's a new one a few years later. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember all of these poor trainers and teachers that were heavily discounting their online work because they had spent so many years telling their clients how much better the machine work was.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah, that came back to bite them.
Right? And then suddenly you're like, actually, a TheraBand attached to a wall anchor can work just like a spring. We can do all the standing arm spring work with that TheraBand attached to a wall anchor. It's all good. And the clients were like, well, then why were you telling me for all these years that I had to be on the pedipole or using the arm springs off the Cadillac when
Yeah.
all along I could have just been doing
It's
this
the
with an elastic band.
Yeah. And of course, it's the most convenient thing to have the reformer there, which can do everything for you. And we can save time by just having to use that. And there's so many different ways. But yeah, I mean, really, this might not be the best way to phrase it, but your body is the equipment and the rest of it is just toys. So we're working with your body. And those are toys we fuse with your body to get you to your goals, to get you to move in all planes of motion, to get you healthier, to get you stronger, to get you more mobile. But ultimately, it's your body that's the equipment. And I do think maybe someone like you and like me who have been doing this long enough and more confident enough, we can work with all these different toys and tools. But where the toys do help is for those who can't. Maybe those who just haven't been in the industry long enough and haven't had the chance to be thrown to the wolves, so to speak, and to be put in difficult situations where they had to adapt. So they need that equipment because they don't have the ability to kind of see a way around that and say, how do I design something that looks like this without using this exactly?
Right. And there's also, I think, a lot of personal trainers, Pilates teachers who feel like they don't look the way we teach. We're also kind of teaching our clients to be independent, right? I mean, they can take those bands and those weights and the recorded videos of their sessions and go on and do their stuff without us.
Yeah.
And a lot of teachers are scared of that because they're scared that there's not any more people out there who
Yeah.
might want to come. And they're also scared that the folks who realize they can be independent suddenly won't want personal training.
Yeah.
I
I think
don't,
that's an industry misconception. I
yeah,
think people think it's the education, but really ultimately, Lynda, the people who succeeded under you and me succeeded because of accountability too. Of course, we taught them the right things. We got them to the right place, but ultimately they were accountable. They showed up, they were there, we held them accountable, and we sort of mentored them. I know this is a weird analogy. This is something Dr. Mark Morris, a friend of mine who was on my podcast, just used, but it's like, you put that pot under hot water and you put that pot of water under, to boil, and it's boiling. Once you take that pot off, it's not boiling anymore, right? So, we're sort of the fire that allows that water to boil. And I do think it's a misconception from a lot of people in the industry, just like you stated, who think, oh, they're going to go off on their own and use the bands and use the tools and use the toys. But no, it's the accountability. And then also, if you're good at what you do, you should be confident that the experience you provide, because people are paying also for an experience, right? It's not just paying to get you to their goals. They like spending that hour with Lynda. They like talking about the new shop that just opened up down the street that you and Lynda both shop at. So you have to build that sort of that client relations aspect of your business.
right. And I think that's actually the most, in a way, that's the most important thing, the most important piece of the business, especially when you're doing kind of one-on-one training. I mean, in the Pilates world, I think when I started teaching Pilates, Steve, there were 500 teachers in the entire world.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I first started, our biggest thing was teaching people what Pilates was. Right. And if you think back to the kind of late 80s, early 90s, that's when the fitness world was still very scared of full spine movement. It was like never do a roll up, never do a full sit up, only squat to 90 degrees. There was very like rigid, like the body should only move like this. and of course in Pilates, we were going kind of all over the place, working full ranges of motion, taking the spine. So we really just had to educate. It was all education. But what I'm feeling now is that we're actually kind of in the same boat, because with everything being kind of opened up, I'm in the middle of doing a job search right now for a friend of mine who has a studio in Bermuda. And I'm getting, all kinds of interesting folks who think that they have a comprehensive certification, but only have mat and reformer, or only have a chain specific certification, right? Which teaches you to work at that chain and using the apparatus that they have, and the format that they want, but doesn't necessarily like empower anybody to go out and teach on their own and kind of figure out what their clients need. And I find that this is now also very confusing for clients, right? I've had
Yeah.
clients walk into Real Pilates and be like, there's no megaformer here,
Mm.
because they'd only been going to a Legree studio, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, right, because the megaformer was actually not created by Joseph Pilates. It's a new thing. And so I'm finding clients are confused. Then we also have trainers who are confused.
Yeah.
And really what we have are clients who they don't necessarily want a specific system, right? What they want is to be able to combine things in order to function well.
Yeah. That's
Has
exactly
that
right.
been your experience?
Yeah, that's been my experience. And I mean, we have to be upfront with clients from the outset. And that's why, as a personal trainer, the most important part, like you said, is the personal part, but is speaking about like practical things, is sitting down with your client right away and having that consultation and that conversation about expectations. This is the equipment we're going to use. These are your goals. This is how I train. We have to make sure this is a relationship. We got to make sure this works. And I think that's an important part, because there's an education component of that on the front end, sort of educating each other on your needs so that you can fuse a good relationship together. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think people now more than ever are willing to do a lot of different modalities into one. They don't just have to do Pilates. They don't just have to do weightlifting. I'll tell you that a lot of my clients, former clients, I should say, I don't really work in this capacity much more, but when I was at a facility, who really loved Pilates were my male clients in their 50s and 60s, which you wouldn't necessarily think, but it was a new thing for them. It was a new modality, and a lot of them were golfers. And anything that helped sort of with injury prevention and mobility was very important for them, because ultimately they wanted to be playing golf almost every single day. So that's
Right.
their goal. So how do I work out, get healthier, injury prevention, and loading up the muscles isn't a great idea when you're 60 years old and you need to be mobile all the time, right? So we fuse Pilates with the workout. Now, does that mean I never lifted a weight? No, of course we did some weight training. We did some machines. We did some TRX suspension training. We did some body weight movement. We did a little bit of everything. Sometimes I brought my clients to the pool. It depends on the day. It depends on that check-in conversation that you have on the front end to say, hey, how you feeling today, Sam? Oh, you're a little bit sore from golf and you didn't sleep well last night. Well, we're going to do something easier today. We're not going to do something difficult, right? So maybe they enjoy just doing light work on the reformer. This is a great day for it. And I think using the toys to meet the goals is what we have to do, and not be so dyed in the wool about only doing one thing and all the time.
Right. And then there's also, especially I think for newer trainers and for newer clients to kind of personal training and working out in that way, that folks like to pre-plan everything.
Mm, yep.
And what I learned, especially when I was working in the, on the private island A-list hotel in the Caribbean, was you couldn't pre-plan anything. I never knew who was going to show up. I would go teach my mat class. Everyone would be like, yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I would notice somebody not moving that well. I would be like, hey, what's going on? Oh, I just had spine surgery a few weeks ago. Oh,
Yeah.
thanks for letting me know. I wasn't going to boot those people out of class. They were still paying their, $1,000 to $10,000 a night for for their experience on that island. Um, and I would just kind of modify around, what they had going on in their backs. It's just like life. You can't really pre-plan it because sometimes shit happens. We just have to work with that. And I think, from the client angle, I think it's important for clients to understand that as well, is that when they come into a personal training relationship, it really should be about that discussion of how are they that day, what's going on that day, what are their needs that day.
Completely. Yeah. And I couldn't echo more your thoughts. Personal trainers deal with this all the time. I mentor young personal trainers. I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I had a young female personal trainer come up to me and say, "Hey, this is my workout I wrote off for my client. Can you oversee it? This is the workout I'm going to do." And it was like everything to a T, the repetitions, the weight, the machines, all the stuff. And I said, I'm not going to say her name, but I said, just so you know, the cable machine, which is 30% of your workout, is broken. We can't use it today. We were in a facility that just had one cable machine. And her face went white because she didn't know what to do now. So when you're micro focused and planned to that extent, then all these curveballs that get thrown your way, whether it's the machine's broken or the person has a spine issue, like in your case, Lynda, you're going to be thrown for a loop and not know what to do. So it's so much better. Like, this is coming full circle here, like I said in the beginning of the conversation, to have zoom out macro principles. Let my client move in all directions. Let me provide a high value experience. Let me change up what I do. I don't want to have the same routine each time because, number one, that not only is that boring, but I also have to challenge my clients from a proprioception standpoint, from sort of a muscle confusion standpoint. We can't just do the same exercises over and over. And I think if you work off of that, then you won't get into the situation where you have this curveball that makes your face go white.
Right. Then conversely, I think I want to touch on, do you also agree, though, that it is important that we do have to retouch on the same things every once in a while, right? Because clients need to know that they've gotten better.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you said that, Lynda, because I on the other end of the spectrum, the people who just never repeat exercises and just make everything fun, you can't see if your client is progressing. So it's important that you're doing the same exercises. And also, just from a psychological perspective, clients want to know that they're getting better.
Right.
We've all watched our clients struggle with something, get better at something, and it's such a win for their day, or try to hit a particular weight, number of repetitions, whatever it is, spring tension, and they get it. And they're so happy about that. So that is a great point you make, Lynda. Yeah, of course you want to change things up so it's not boring, but at the same time, it can't be sort of just a complete disarray, do whatever you want at any time. There needs to be a method to the madness where your client is progressing. And you can only do that if you're watching them do some of the same exercises over and over.
Yeah, it was very interesting to me. I think it was really during the height of Beachbody, when they were kind of at that peak in, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where everyone just started talking about muscle confusion.
Yeah.
It was like a phrase that really nobody had really used before. And then Tony Horton's like, muscle confusion.
Tony Horton said
it. And then I had all of these guests coming, some of whom were just doing P90X. They would come to the gym with their iPad and just do it. And I looked at them one day and I said, number one, you do understand that muscles don't get confused. Our brains get confused. We get confused. The mind gets confused. That's how that works. But doing all these different things all the time is not necessarily serving you.
Yeah.
Well. And ultimately it might take it, it always took a little while, but they'd come the next day and be like, you're right. I ended up getting injured, or this didn't work, or I tried to push this way and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And suddenly I realized that I wasn't getting strong or any stronger in an area because I was just all over the place.
Yeah. If you relate it to sports, Lynda, it's like, you want to continue repetitions and focus on one area of whatever you're doing. Let's go ahead and say it's, I don't know, throwing a baseball, throwing a fastball. And then it gets to a point where you've now are at the most efficient you can be at throwing that fastball, most likely. There's not much more you can do. So now, we're going to learn how to throw a curveball. We're going to learn how to throw something else because we've already become efficient at that. But if each day you're only throwing one of every pitch, you're never going to get good at it,
Right.
right? So that's why we want to, like you said, make sure that we become efficient at the motions first before we move on and try to challenge ourselves through the quote unquote muscle confusion.
I like that. The quote unquote muscle confusion. Because, it is an easy, I think that the phrase is more of an easy way for folks to kind of understand that there are things that you do want to change up and that you want to change things for your body and not just consistently do the same thing over and over and over again. But that there still needs to be some kind of consistency. And, this kind of brings us back in a way full circle, because I think for all of us who have done any kind of, nationally recognized certification program, NASM, I've done ACE, and have done Pilates training, that I don't know about you, but I find that I end up using those Pilates principles all the time, no matter what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
And so if the clients end up walking away with anything, they at least have a sense of what it means to have a strong torso. They know the difference between, the rotation, the forward flexion, the hyperextension, and what the middle ground is. I'm not even saying neutral spine because I hate that phrase for a variety of reasons. And that kind of Pilates work is what I end up pulling through everything else that I teach. Do you find that to be?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, there's always principles that I pull from all the modalities into the fitness, but really from Pilates. And forget about just like the verbiage that you would use in classical Pilates. But if you're just talking to clients, the way that you can move your hips and shoulders in a 360 fashion, that you have to communicate with your clients that, in standard, let's call it standard weightlifting exercises, it's just not there, right? So they're moving in sagittal plane, and they're moving sometimes in frontal plane and maybe transverse as far as their torso, but they're not really getting those joints that are supposed to move in more of a circular fashion to do that sort of thing. So I always had to communicate that with clients who, let's say clients who didn't want to use the reformer. They weren't interested in anything Pilates based and they just wanted to work in fitness. I would have to sort of trick them into doing what were basically Pilates based movements without using Pilates equipment to make sure they were moving around, and we had, joint health too. And it wasn't just about muscle building.
Yeah. Because let's face it, muscle building without mobility often leads to muscle tears, or ligament or soft tissue tears. And that's never fun. I've actually been in the gym and heard that. Yeah. I was in the gym one day and watched one of the personal trainers do a bicep curl. I knew he was very, very tight in his biceps and very tight in his pecs. And he did the last one and kind of came out of it. And this big pop was heard all over the gym floor. And then he had to have surgery to reattach the bicep tendon and get that to work again. And I think, people don't always realize that mobility and flexibility is not necessarily just for the sake of mobility and flexibility. It's for the body to function well as a whole. I think that's one of the things that Joseph Pilates recognized. And when he was, stuck on the Isle of Man in the internment camp for the entire First World War, he was like, we got to start moving, and we got to start moving our joints as best we can in short periods of time and in a small space. Otherwise,
exactly right.
Otherwise we're all going to leave here even worse than when we came. Provided we survive the influenza epidemic.
Yeah, well, this is a whole nother conversation, but really the problem I think we're getting with the general population is that, vanity supersedes health. And a lot of times with vanity doesn't come the proper exercises for mobility. It comes through hypertrophy and muscle building. And, they reap what they sow. They end up getting injured, like you said, or having long-term health problems because, their focus is not for long-term health and wellness. And sometimes you live and you learn. It takes a few injuries. It takes a few mistakes before you go down the right path and focus more on mobility and joint health, and make sure you meet with the proper Pilates instructor rather than just meet with a personal trainer. Make sure you're moving in all directions. And I think people like you are spreading the word, and hopefully there's more people who are jumping into Pilates throughout the years to come.
As are you. I mean, and especially for, you coming from that more of that sports background, and then bringing in the Pilates as this important piece of the stabilization and the mobility work that people need. I just think there are some modalities that are just really well suited to working mobility with even some of the tightest immobile people. Pilates happens to be one of them. I have always personally found it more effective than yoga. That's just my own, kind of personal thing, because we can break it down in a way that's a little more Western oriented, I think, and a little more, and some people just like using equipment, let's face it.
That's
So
right.
when you bring them in and they're on the Reformer or they're on the Cadillac and they're doing those things, they're like, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I would argue that there's, if you're dealing with senior clients, which you and I have had long conversations about, sometimes you can't do everything on the ground. It's not possible. If you're 85 years old and you have a lot of back and health related issues, the ground is going to be limiting for you. Whereas the Reformer, you're going to have more options to work with said client, as opposed to yoga, which doesn't have that ability to do that. I'm not saying you can't do anything, but there's just more options that you're going to have with an 80-year-old on a Reformer than you are with the ground and a mat.
Right. So, Steve, if my listeners who, are personal trainers, Pilates teachers, and potential clients, if they want to get in touch with you, how can people reach you? How can people work with you? How can people find out more?
You can find me. I'm pretty active on Instagram. It's just my full name, Steve Washuta. I have a website, which is fitnessbusiness101.com. You could also get to that by just going to stevewashuta.com. It goes to the same site. But I answer all my direct messages on Instagram, so that's probably your best bet to get in touch with me. So whether it's you want to potentially work with me as a one-on-one virtual personal trainer, whether you want more information about my podcast, the TrulyFit podcast, where we interview experts in fitness and health to expand our wisdom and wealth, experts like Lynda, who's been on 3 times. You can get all that information at my Instagram at Steve Washuta.
Great. And we'll also, of course, have all the links to all of your stuff in the show notes to this, so folks can kind of easily just go into, wherever they're listening to the podcasts or use my Buzzsprout link, and you can find out all that you need to know about Steve and get in touch with him. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And as always, I'm going to ask you, if you love the show, to head on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and hopefully a written review. I know Apple doesn't make it easy anymore. You have to go through the podcast app. You can't just do it through the website anymore. But whether you listen to the podcast on Apple or not, the Apple reviews make a big difference. So I would love to see that. And Steve, thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing all that you know.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful to chat.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.